Just because a physician has a script pad and can write you a prescription for HRT does not mean that you're getting the HRT that you're seeking. So we always throw it back on ladies and say, get yourself educated, know all of your options, and then make a decision as to what works best for your goals, your needs, your lifestyle. I mean, we have a woman who she was offered transdermal creams, both progesterone and estradiol, and this was going to be her HRT regimen. Huge fans of that, not normally. She's also an avid scuba diver. She's in the water all the time. Well, guess what? The skin is a reservoir, and if we flush it underwater, we're going to dump our hormones, and so transdermal applications would not have been good for her.
Welcome to the Optimized Woman, the podcast for high-performing women ready to take back their health. I'm Orshi McNaughton, a board-certified holistic health practitioner and functional nutritionist. If you're tired of feeling stuck, you can't lose the weight no matter what you do, your energy is in the toilet, your metabolism feels like it's at a standstill, and you lost the spark you once had, then you're in the right place. We are here to unleash the unstoppable force you're meant to be and give you the tools to fix what's holding you back. So if you're ready to own it, start thriving again, and live the life you deserve, and let's get to it. Hey, welcome friends. Today I'm joined by Kristin Johnson and Maria Claps, co-authors of the book, The Great Menopause Myth. Together, we are uncovering the realities of perimenopause and menopause, a phase of life that can reshape women's health in powerful ways. We explore how hormonal shifts impact cognitive health, thyroid function, and adrenal balance, and why perimenopause may be the overlooked cause behind fatigue and weight gain, even for younger women in their late 30s and early 40s. This conversation challenges conventional wisdom, offering insights that every woman needs to hear. So let's dive in.
So about 13 years ago, I was experiencing symptoms of perimenopause. I wasn't really quite sure what was happening at that point, but I knew something was changing. Like you just know that even though you don't know where is this all coming from. So I decided to seek out a doctor in New York City, Manhattan, and it was a very mixed bag of an appointment. He was holistic, but also tended to push like a lot of supplements. So I was 43 at the time. He actually did prescribe bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for me. I used it for several months and then I just gave up on it because I had no support. I just didn't really truly understand what was going on and why I needed this. Given a lot of supplements and probably was over tested. So at that point, I just realized, okay, there's more education for me out there. And I went and I pursued it. And then I just honestly, a passion grew up around me, around the issue of women's health. So we both together, Kristin and I, have been kind of doing this for a long time, driven by, our desire to learn, our own personal experience, our mentorship. Like we know it's really trending right now, but it's been going on for a while, both of us.
And I ironically was the exact same age as Maria. And that's just something that we've always kind of bonded over. As I was also 43. For me, it was 11 years ago. And I had the similar pursuit as Maria did, but a completely different outcome. So I was living in Boston at the time. It's kind of world headquarters for conventional medicine and big pharma. Went to my physician. I'm like, something is wrong with me. And she completely denied it and said, you're too young. It can't be hormonal. There's nothing wrong with you. I already had an IUD, which is probably what they would have suggested. Maybe a slight reference was made to antidepressants, but beyond that, it was sort of like, this is nothing wrong with you. This is all in your head, essentially. And that's really difficult for a woman who's like feeling the earth kind of shaking beneath her feet and knows something is off, but nobody's willing to kind of validate for you what's going on. So exactly the same response in me as Maria. I think that's what kind of binds us, is we're not going to sort of take these patent answers and no explanations and just run with them. We're going to say, no, I need to know more. I need to be educated on this. I want information. I don't feel empowered by the way you're handling this. And so I too went back to school, got mentorship, all of the things. So it's been something that, like Maria said, it's booming right now, and we're glad for the awareness. But we're frustrated because we've got a decade plus into this, and many folks are really, really new to the topic. And when you're new to something or they don't even have personal experience in it, but they're kind of pivoting their business towards it, what ends up happening is a lot of regurgitation of bad information. And that's just not helping women very much. So to answer your second question, what really inspired the book? It was that. It was us kind of saying, everything that we see in the shelves is just not hitting the mark. It's not getting it right. It's not giving women all the information. Many times it's very biased, or it's kind of shoving people down a particular pathway to a product or something like that, or trying to make it social political. We just kind of rejected that approach and said, we need to write something that talks to our girlfriends, talks to women, and says, look, this is what's going on. This is why it's relevant. Here are your options. And a lot of these things are modifiable through lifestyle and strategies. So let's work on those things.
And most women, just like you guys in your early 40s, that's when most women start, those symptoms are just starting to pop up. And because we don't have any education, people just like, women feel like, okay, something is not right and something is out of whack. And then we start blaming our hormones, but we have no idea what's going on. And then, as you said, the allopathic system sort of doesn't validate it for us. And most women are gaslit and really don't, dismissed or given birth control pill or synthetic options that are, or IUD, as you mentioned, that are not always the best options. So
Yeah.
I actually wanted to open up the discussion with a quote from your book. So I'm going to read, actually, I have two short quotes. I'm going to read that, and then we can kind of jump into the topic. So the first one is, too much of the discussion around menopause is merely different messages telling women to just accept the oncoming symptoms of aging. The reality is that by age 60, women match or lead men in nearly every disease associated with aging. So this is the first quote, and that resonated with me so much, because I see that with all the women I'm working with, that between like 45 and 55, that 10 years is such a rapid decline in health for women.
Yeah.
And it's unexplainable. I mean, we're going to explain that today.
It's explainable.
Yeah, it's explainable.
It's like, how come in such a short amount of time we lose our energy, we lose our brain function, we get fat, everything goes wrong all at once, and it all happens within such a short amount of time. And then the second quick quote from your book is that only 54% of women can correctly define menopause. So why and how can a topic so quintessentially female not even be understood? So that also hit home with me, because it's so true. Like, there's so many misconceptions. So I want to kind of dive into our first question is, what's the main message of the book, and how do you hope that it changes the conversation around menopause?
Yeah, I mean, the main message is essentially that menopause is a massive shift in life, and our health is the outcome or the consequence. A decline in our health is the consequence. And women need to pay attention, and they shouldn't wait until they hit the brick wall. They shouldn't take for granted a lack of symptoms. They shouldn't just assume it's not going to happen to them because, let's say, they're thin, metabolically healthy, they fast in the mornings, they strength train, they do all the things that everyone's talking about on social media right now. Those things will help improve your experience of things. It's not going to protect you from the declines in health that come from the loss of hormones. And that it's a hard truth, right? I think so many women, I think particularly because social media, there's so much information gathering, influencers out there, do this, do this, do this. And everyone, women, especially that 30 and 40-year-old crowd, they're like, I'm going to fast, I'm going to take my collagen, I'm going to eat my this, I'm going to do that. And they're in their mind, they're not going to age. They're not going to be caught up in that snare like Maria and I were. And this book we want it to be a little bit of a wake-up call. Ladies, all of those things are important. They're great because they're modifiable and within your control. But you need to face a really harsh reality, is that your loss of hormones, which is inevitable if you are born with ovaries and you have birthdays, you're losing your hormones, period. That all those modifiable things, all those lifestyle interventions aren't going to be enough.
And I was just going to chime in and say, and probably only 5 or 6% of the U.S. population is actually metabolically healthy.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think
Exactly.
that small choir that we sing to are the health optimization group that is doing all those things. But the vast majority of people are already metabolically unhealthy. So when their hormones start declining, it just exponentially gets worse.
Absolutely true. But you know that there is that subset, and they're loud because they like to put themselves out on social media, that it's not going to happen to them. And Maria and I are like, newsflash, it is.
Oh, yeah. Well, also, I would like to add this, Orshi, you actually said, like, why does our health decline so much from approximately 45 to 55? And we would say that it does to a certain degree and dependent on your lifestyle, right? So we're not discounting the role that lifestyle plays. It can play it should, and it can play a profound role in a woman's health. But we would say, wait till a woman crosses over the threshold of 60. Even the ones who put in all the work that Kristin just mentioned, and they don't seem to be suffering from symptoms, or they don't have what appears to be issues of hormone loss.
And they might even be cycling still, Maria, coming into their late 50s.
I mean, I think we've known a 58-year-old, 59.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is kind of shocking, but it does happen. And so that's a whole other discussion in and of itself. But once they cross over 60, almost all the lifestyle issues, lifestyle supports are just they just don't
They're going to
make
fall
much
short.
of a difference. They fall short. They're just, as Kristin said, they're just not enough. So yeah. But it's hormone loss, right? That's a big part of it. It's not the only part. Our lifestyle absolutely contributes, but it's hormone loss, and that's why we are aging, really.
Yeah, and to go to your comment about only 54% can define it, clinically, menopause is the 366th day, i.e. the day that you've gone now one full year without a menstrual cycle. That's it. That's all it is. That's the definition if you go into a medical textbook or you talk to your doctor. The problem is that completely simplifies it down to this moment in time, when in reality, there's this continuum, and it starts in our 40s, and it's a slow progressive change in our hormone sufficiency. And while those things are happening, while the hormones are starting to drop, lots of physiologic changes are happening, whether you feel them or not. So again, kind of focusing on the idea of menopause as though it's some sort of finish line or start line, or however a woman wants to look at it, is actually going to catch you in a bad position, because you are missing opportunities for the close to decade leading up to that. And that is what we're trying to get women to focus on.
Yeah, so let's also talk about perimenopause and maybe start with that first. So you kind of define menopause. Let's talk about what perimenopause is, and let's start with that.
It's really the approximately anywhere from 4 to 10, maybe 12 years. 12 seems a little bit long, but leading up to menopause, where there are changes happening. So the thing, though, is that we don't always see or feel those changes, but they are absolutely happening. It is mostly considered a neurological transition. And that's, again, whether you have symptoms or not, it is a neurological transition. But there are impacts felt all over the body. Typically, what's happening is progesterone is declining first. It doesn't fluctuate much. And then estrogen is declining as well. A lot of people mistake the perimenopausal period for this period of estrogen dominance. And that is really a term that's very misleading to women. Makes them feel like they have too much estrogen, and 99% of the times they don't. Really, what they have is not enough progesterone to kind of buffer and support the estrogen that they do have. We have the ovaries they're decoupling from the brain. So it's really the brain that controls the making of our hormones. So the brain pituitary sends out stimulating hormones, right? So, and then the pituitary is talking to the ovaries. And again, like I said, that's being decoupled. And sometimes the ovaries are going to get that message, and they're going to make a robust amount of estradiol. And sometimes they're not going to. And essentially, hormone imbalance is the default state of perimenopause. It's just like this period of time that women have to go through, and they can support themselves with all the lifestyle stuff. And many women will actually opt to start hormone replacement therapy in perimenopause, which is a totally valid, and we would say wise thing to do. If you're going to start it earlier, the better.
Yeah, think of peri as hormone insufficiency and menopause as hormone deficiency. That's a pretty kind of simple way to think about it is it's insufficient to sort of maintain the engine. By the time you get to menopause, it's just flat out deficient, the engine's sputtering. So performance of women during that perimenopausal transition is really obvious to some. To others, it's not. And I think as women, we tend to gaslight ourselves a little bit where we're thinking, I'm really stressed out, or I'm really anxious, or my sleep is bad. Maybe it's my recovery isn't enough from my workouts. And we sort of dismiss these things with all these sort of other explanations. But the reality is even if your cycles are not changing during perimenopause, your hormones are insufficient to maintain those biologic processes that they control beyond menstruation. And therefore, these changes are happening. And these women will be like, oh my gosh, my lipids are increasing. Oh my gosh, my blood pressure is increasing. My skin is so dry, etc. No woman looks at her skin dryness at 43 and goes, oh, it's perimenopause. She just thinks, oh, I need a new moisturizer.
Right.
Like that's kind of the mentality. And so this is why we're trying to raise awareness and be like, no. There are so many things. And I think one of your questions was like, what systems? It's literally Orshi head to toe. There is not a single system in the female body that is not impacted by this transition of loss of hormones.
Can you briefly walk us through the different systems in the body and how they are affected by estrogen and progesterone deficiency, one or both, or even including testosterone too, probably?
I mean, so it has a lot to do with receptors. So you have receptors for these hormones. So we'll take estrogen, estradiol, and you have receptors on, I believe it's everything except for red blood cells. Let's take something random, like the optic nerve. You have estrogen receptors on the optic nerve. You have estradiol receptors in the stomach, in the liver, on the bone.
I mean, your ear canals, the little hair in your ears that help modulate things. This is why women will be like, oh, I've got tinnitus all of a sudden. We're like, hormone loss.
And is that estrogen or progesterone tinnitus? Like what's missing there?
Mostly estradiol for tinnitus. Yeah.
Okay.
But even like what is it? The gland in the eye,
For the tear, for
meibomium. I forget the name of it. But yes.
Meibomium?
Yeah. Meibomium, yes. This dry eye, very common with women, and they just don't connect. And no doctor, I mean, let's face it, our medical system is so flawed and broken because it's very siloed. So if you go to your OBGYN and you just happen to mention, like, I have really dry eyes, they're going to go, oh, you should go to the eye doctor.
Yeah.
Like, in reality, they should be the ones going, oh, you're at 44, you probably need some hormone support. So, I mean, and like Maria said, the liver, so you've got estradiol receptors in the liver. That means your lipids aren't going to get cleared as efficiently as they used to. Your gut lumen and the mucosal lining is not going to be maintained. So what do we see? Food intolerances, insensitivities, and autoimmune diseases start to increase. Your endothelial cells, which is like the lining of the pipe of your arteries. Okay, we have estrogen receptors in there. How do we maintain kind of the health of that lining? We need that estradiol signal. When we don't get that, and this is both progesterone and estradiol, when we don't get that, we start to have damage to that wall. What gets triggered by damage to the endothelial wall? A plaque cascade, right? So there's so many things going on. And that's the other thing is what you experience, Orshi, is going to be different than what I experienced. And what I experienced is going to be different than what Maria experienced. And I think, again, kind of blaming social media, we've got these sort of signs of estrogen loss, signs of progesterone loss. It's impossible to list all of them. And women start to think, well, oh, my neighbor, I know she's got perimenopause because her doctor told her so, and her vagina's dry, but my vagina's not dry. So that must not be my problem because I'm suddenly having anxiety. Well, newsflash, they're both related to the estrogen loss, right? So that's the thing that's so hard, is to be able to give a synopsis of what's affected. As Maria said, other than red blood cells, every single thing in the female body's got these receptors for our sex hormones. And whatever those particular body parts are responsible for doing, it starts to not be performed as well.
I wanted to take a moment and go through different systems. So one of the systems connection between hormones I would love to talk about is thyroid function and sex hormones. And you guys mentioned the term Thyropause, which I keep hearing now more and more, which is very interesting because fatigue, brain fog, heart palpitations, weight gain, all these things really overlap between sex hormone deficiencies and hypothyroidism. And so how do we sort out, is this the thyroid? Is it, or, and a lot of women that are already on hormone replacement therapy still have the symptoms. What is sort of the interplay between sex hormones and thyroid function?
Well, so the thyroid is kind of our metabolic engine, right? And we really need to have good mitochondrial function to start, and we need good mineral status, which means we're going to have good digestion. Assuming you're eating a good diet, you're going to need to be able to absorb those things, etc. So we need a lot of signaling molecules in order to get the thyroid to function correctly, but a lot of that is dependent upon our hormone sufficiency. The reality too is that even with the best HRT, we're not going to be Benjamin Buttons. We're still going to age. And I know. And so the thyroid is one of those glands that's uniquely sensitive to the aging of the mitochondria of the body. So we're going to see this natural aging, and then we see this hormone insufficiency / deficiency that comes up around the same time or even before it. And so it becomes this perfect storm. Now, one of the interesting things about HRT in the thyroid is that if you think about it, we have sort of these wonderful vessels called our ovaries that were responsible for sort of maintaining our hormones and then pulsing them out as the body signaled and needed them. When we use hormone replacement therapy, we sort of take these exogenous outside the body hormones and put them either on our skin, our muscle, however they're administered in our gut. And it kind of creates this like reservoir, but outside of the ovaries. And so we've got this kind of gross exposure, almost like a bolus, right, of hormones. And the body will pulse it out through our capillaries and different microvascular function. But the reality is that this big exposure of hormones from HRT all at once, no matter what type you're on, the body's response is to increase what's called binding proteins. And when it increases binding proteins, it sort of mops up free hormones that are in circulation. And that will include thyroid hormones. And so women who have probably an aging thyroid to start may start to see a slower rate of conversion of her inactive to active thyroid hormone because of this increase in thyroid binding proteins as a result of having the HRT on board. So it's a very important connection. They're complementary, but again, because of our allopathic siloed medical system, just because someone can write you a script for HRT doesn't mean that they actually fully understand the impacts of HRT and how to manage it in the body. And so we would say if your HRT provider is not also properly monitoring and managing your thyroid, you probably need a new provider because those two things have to be looked at hand in hand.
Is thyroid binding globulin should be tested with all the other thyroid panel? Is that something you guys test? And
no. So we test. Gosh, it's like I can't think of it right now. What is the hormone? Sex hormone binding globulin.
Yeah, SHBG. Yeah. We look at SHBG.
That tends to go up with estrogen, testosterone, and even thyroid. So we are really insistent, as Kristin said, that women, midlife women on HRT, not on HRT, need to be investigating thyroid.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Now with TBG that you mentioned, TBG going up with estrogen replacement therapy, but with TRT, it actually goes down. So you can kind of, could it balance each other out?
Yeah, but women aren't getting TRT at the same levels that the studies show that it makes thyroid binding globulin go down. So when you're looking at TRT and thyroid, that's usually in a male model, science model. It's not really that, I mean, there are women who are being overdosed on testosterone. We'll be perfectly blunt, like the pellet ladies, the injection ladies, and people who are using the male concentration of creams on women. Those people might be seeing, I don't want to say an improvement in thyroid, but not a lower impact on thyroid because of their TRT. But women who are getting what's called physiologic dosing, meaning appropriate for women dosing of thyroid, aren't really going to see that. In fact, DHEA, which is another androgen, can actually increase sex hormone binding globulin, et cetera. So again, it's such a very delicate balance. And this is why getting a really good provider, not just someone who can give you HRT, but someone who understands and sort of invests in you when it comes to your HRT is super important.
And the other piece I wanted to bring in is HPA axis dysfunction, which in adrenal health, that also starts affecting women in that perimenopause, menopause age group. So how does stress and adrenal function influence hormone and thyroid balance? And what should women focus on to support adrenal health during menopause?
Adrenals, I feel like it's going to be a bit of a broken record. So thyroid, ovaries age quite quickly, right? They age very quickly. They're aging sort of like almost before the rest of the body. The thyroid is aging. The adrenals have kind of supported us our whole life. They have many functions. They kind of manage, blood sugar responses, our immune system. They help us to buffer stress. Do they fatigue? No, we don't believe that at all. That just kind of is really an old model. And we don't believe that. Can we be low cortisol for certain reasons? Absolutely. But it's not because the gland itself is fatiguing. It's more of a mitochondrial issue. So it's largely a lifestyle driven issue with our adrenals and our cortisol. And a lot of times, and I'll just add this in. I know you didn't ask this, but I think you might find this interesting. We see like a lot of women in their, say, 39, 40, 41 that are like seeking testosterone because they heard like it's great for their libido or it's great to help them build muscle. And we would say that before they seek out a prescription for testosterone, they really, really need to look at their adrenal health and their lifestyle, because in almost all cases, they should be able to bring enough testosterone to bear from the ovaries and from the adrenal glands. So what can women do to support this? Like stop fasting, get enough.
Say eat enough.
Yeah, just eat enough. There's like such an extreme emphasis on how do I look, and I want to be thin or I want to be muscular or what have you. And these things are not necessarily bad. Women's bodies are changing during this time, and sometimes quite rapidly. And sometimes it's just very upsetting for women. So they tend to go into restrict mode and they're not eating. And again,
And they're over exercising. So
they're over exercising and under eating, fasting, not getting enough protein, maybe not getting enough sleep, not exposing to morning sunlight, kind of always on the go treadmill. And this will absolutely have an impact on overall health and adrenal health.
Yeah. I mean, it frustrates us because as much as there's this menopause boom right now, what's kind of coming up behind it is now this perimenopause boom, which I kind of have to chuckle at. And I'm sure I'm going to like irritate a bunch of the 30 and 40-year-old listeners. But the reality is there's nothing special about perimenopause. It's the same stuff happening that happens in menopause. So like creating this false dichotomy between the two things is really not going to be helpful to women. But what we do see and what we know, whether you're 20 or 40, is that if you have unmitigated stress in your life, the body's essentially order of operations is going to say, oh, I'm under threat. This is not a safe environment for me right now. And so it's going to down-regulate reproductive function, right? So that means our ovary production is going to be suppressed. Again, whether you're 20 or 40, etc. So what happens is that these ladies are coming in after this decade of 30s, go. And then they start having cycle changes. They go, oh my God, it's my period. I'm in perimenopause. And it's getting worse because they really are like beholden to the aesthetic. And so they're under eating and they're over exercising, CrossFit 5 days a week, got to get my 10,000 steps in every day, almost like punitive approaches to life. I always look at these people. I'm like, how much time do you have in your day? Like, what are you doing? Anyway, they do all these things and then they blame it on perimenopause. The reality is this is the HPA axis dysfunction at play, right? It's not that you have a lack of capacity to produce hormones, is that instead your hormone production is being suppressed in order to protect your body because of the stress that you've put it under and the stress that you're not dealing with. And some people that might be trauma and some it just might be everyday, habits. So it's really interesting to see these ladies who TRT is their go-to and it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And then ultimately they have to face the music, deal with their stress, and guess what happens? Their cycle normalizes. And this is where we want to go because it wasn't perimenopause all along, right? And you didn't need the testosterone all along. Testosterone in ladies does not fall off a cliff in our 40s and 50s. It just doesn't. So again, if you feel like you're having struggles with these things and you're in what you believe is perimenopause, I would say the vast majority of you, it's start with HPA axis dysfunction, normalize your lifestyle habits to support your body's health. You're probably going to make your perimenopausal years a hell of a lot better.
So did I hear you right? So you don't really recommend TRT at all for women, or do you, at some point, at certain age?
No, we don't believe that. We think testosterone can absolutely be a part of a woman's hormonal repletion strategy
In menopause.
at the right time. At the right
And what
time.
is the right time?
Well, so she really needs, okay, so let's just take your 48-year-old perimenopausal woman whose period comes like every 60 or 80 days or something like that. Most likely what she needs to start with is progesterone and estradiol, okay? Once she has those levels
While she deals with her adrenal issues.
for sure. For sure. So 3, 6, 9 months later, she's got she's got the estradiol and the progesterone figured out. She's fairly stable on it. If she needs testosterone, she should be tested. Adding it too soon it's not a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, the estrogen, Maria talked about the receptors. So estradiol and testosterone essentially share a cell wall at the receptor. And so when women are dumping testosterone into their system before they actually need it, not only will they sort of short circuit their own endogenous production of testosterone, which by the way, still should be robust well into your 50s and 60s if you've got good adrenal function, then they're also blunting up to almost a third of the estradiol reception at the receptor because that testosterone and estradiol share that cell wall. So that's a reason why when it comes to HRT management, it should not be estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone all at once. Absolutely should not be. Manage and normalize your estradiol and progesterone levels, get that ticking away. And then, as Maria said, if you need it, add testosterone. But it's almost becoming this default offering to women, and that's not serving them. So
yeah, interesting. I haven't really heard too many women being offered testosterone replacement therapy. As a matter of fact, what they say is that it's very, very difficult to get testosterone to be prescribed for women. But
that's these pellets. I mean, so many of these girls
the pellets are awful.
pellets.
Yeah,
I'm and not that's even testosterone, half of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's being offered by certain doctors because that's all they do is pellets.
Moneymaker too.
It's a good moneymaker. And so let's put it in everybody. But
and let's be honest, Orshi, like if I gave you jet fuel, you'd feel great. Right? If you've got the fuel that launches rockets, you're going to be like, woo! And it's a short-term win. And that's what we want ladies to realize. Like, this is a long game. Feeling and looking your best in your 40s because you're drinking jet fuel is not a long-term winning strategy.
Obviously, women try to figure out, okay, so how do I figure out what is the right cocktail of hormones that I should be on in perimenopause and menopause? What type of lab markers do you guys run? Do you use blood, saliva, urine? What type of testing do you use with your clients?
So generally we prefer blood. And she can test estradiol, progesterone, and really even more key than those two would be follicle stimulating hormone. Because once you get above 25, you're likely not coming down. And even if you're still menstruating, you're like deeply perimenopausal at that part and pretty close to menopause. So that would be a great time to start. And heck, I mean, it honestly, once you start hitting 20, probably just get started for the most part. Because that's pretty high at that point.
And do you find like the first step is usually progesterone?
For some women. Yeah.
Depends. Yeah. I mean, there's theories around does taking progesterone sort of augment the machine. We just see it clinically that progesterone might work, but only for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Ultimately, women are going to need estradiol.
And it will. It will. I can't tell you how many, like Kristin, how many mid-50s women that we get. I'm on progesterone for like 6 years and I'm not getting any benefits. And it can even kind of turn on you because so what happens is that progesterone needs, like other hormones, needs a receptor to go in. And women are kind of amazed to learn that what creates the receptor for progesterone is actually the estradiol level in the bloodstream. So when you don't have that estradiol level in the bloodstream, you don't have the receptor for progesterone to be really used efficiently. and optimally in the body. And then women can get symptoms like bloat or moodiness.
Yeah.
Or joint laxity, things like that. Yeah.
So most often, obviously everybody's different case and you look at their labs first, but most often you recommend doing both at the same time, maybe at different doses, but you usually start estradiol and progesterone together.
Yeah. A lot of women start them together. I mean, we have a clinician on our team who is on estradiol progesterone, and I think she's like 43, 44, and she started at like 42. So yeah. If needed, can absolutely start both at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. The perils of two dogs and someone knocks on your door.
So I'm curious with the inconsistencies of testing progesterone on blood work. So you mentioned you guys run blood tests primarily. Do you look at progesterone and do you find those inconsistent, or do you just go by symptoms to dose progesterone?
Well, endogenously produced progesterone should be capturable on a blood lab test. But when women are taking HRT, it is very difficult to get an accurate volume of progesterone reading in just about any version. You're going to see overexpressions of it in metabolites like urine, and you're going to see underexpressions of it in blood. So there are some HRT providers who just after a certain amount of time don't keep testing progesterone, depending on the regimen that they're using. But if you're a young cycling woman, you should be able to see your progesterone in your blood labs. So if you're a perimenopausal woman and you get blood labs taken and your progesterone's quite low, there's your sign. Now, one thing that Maria and I are assuming here is that women know when to test. Because if you're still cycling, the reality is in the first 2 weeks of your cycle, you're not making robust amounts of progesterone. And what happens to a lot of ladies is they get stuck in that trap of they've got their annual OBGYN appointment, they're getting their pap smear and their breast exam, both things that we agree with, encourage, go do it. But they don't pay attention to what their cycle day is when they have their appointment. So they go in and it's like day 7. And their OBGYN, well-meaning, might say, well, let's take your blood test. And they're like, oh my gosh, your progesterone's like non-existent. Or they'll come to us and go, I have no progesterone. We're like, well, what cycle day? Well, I don't know what cycle day. We're like, well, okay, that's relevant, right? So keep in mind that you want to be testing, let's say, day 21 of your cycle, ideally, thereabouts, to really get a good idea of what your progesterone levels might be.
And that can be very tricky in perimenopause when your cycles can be, who knows how, like,
and that's where that FSH number, but that's where that FSH number really does come in. Because if the brain is pushing on the accelerator pedal to the ovaries and pumping out follicle stimulating hormones saying, hey, this is not an environment that's working for me, that's all you really need to know.
Yeah. And truly, in the absence of testing, again, if a perimenopausal woman cannot test on day 21 because she's got an irregular period, that is a very strong sign in and of itself. In fact, once you've gone 60 days without a period and you're a woman in your 40s, you're deep in perimenopause.
Hey there, Orshi here with a quick message. This is a brand new podcast, and I would love your help with growing our community. If you're finding this discussion valuable, I would be honored if you take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with a girlfriend or any woman in your life who might benefit from this information. Your support truly makes a difference. So thank you for helping me spread the word. And now let's get back to our conversation. Now, let me ask you with hormone replacement therapy. So if you have there's women in estradiol, and when you test them, there's a very high conversion to estrone. And even with liver support, some women, just their ratios are very much leaning towards estrone conversion. Do you find that to be okay, or do you think that it's really important to maintain like a ratio between estradiol and estrone?
That's like getting into micromanaging the body.
Though, estradiol and estrone intraconvert. So just because on the day you captured it, there was a lot of estrone, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you don't know that it was just about to convert to estradiol. So that is kind of a fool's errand to be chasing estrone numbers.
Well, and I also think it creates like this unnecessary stress. Kristin and I believe we do well to check our estradiol every few months or so, especially in the beginning, first year or two of HRT, to see like what level are we generally at. That's a really great idea. If out of curiosity you want to test estrone once or twice, fine. But honestly, and then women stress out about like trying to micromanage these inherent tendencies of the body, and you really can't do that much about it. Now,
It's not actionable.
depending on the type of HRT, the route of administration will affect how much estrone you make. So there's that to be considered. But beyond that, again, if you're on transdermal or a patch and you are kind of chasing estradiol and estrone all the time and you're obsessing about it, I think you're creating completely unnecessary stress.
Yeah.
So you don't want to worry about like supporting the liver and
Well, look at your hormone metabolism. I know a lot of people like the Dutch test and we like it and use it for hormone metabolism, not hormone volume. We're not fans of it for that. But if you look at the two phases of metabolism, right? We have the phase one kind of detox, and then we have the methylation cycle. Even a poor pie chart, phase one, can be rectified with a good methylation function. So again, it takes nuance, right? We need to not just look at one thing in isolation, and we need to understand what the whole picture is. And if the whole picture says you've got decent phase one and really good phase two, stop stressing over how much estrone your blood levels show. It's not worth it.
yeah, can you guys walk us through like the different landscape of hormone replacement therapy options? Wherever you want to start with that. Obviously, you can even start with things like the birth control pill, which is not really a good option, but maybe you guys can speak.
Well, it is offered, right?
Yeah, HRT.
A lot of the kind of kind of big menopause doctor guru accounts will still kind of give a lot of credence to the birth control pill for women in perimenopause, and honestly, by kind of just by default, some women in menopause. And that is because it is the position of American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists that women can just safely stay on their birth control pill up through age 55. Well, we know that the kind of average age of that clinical definition of menopause is 51 for most women, but heck, I mean, that can be 47, that can be 43, that can be 57. So just the fact that women are maintained on that, and that is considered, again, by the big menopause doctor accounts that seemingly promote bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, they also do very much kind of give credence to the birth control pill as a means of managing symptoms. And that's unfortunately because they see menopause as an issue of symptom management for the most part. So yeah, that still very much is an option. I guess.
Yeah.
Kristin, you can take
I
on.
mean, when it comes to HRT, women have to realize it's not a one size fits all. It's not a uniform commercial product that you pull off the shelf. Okay. There's also different modalities for different hormones. So we would posit, don't swallow your estrogen. So look at transdermal applications, want systemic for most women, not locally applied to the vagina. We've had women who were married to physicians who found out that they were osteoporotic and were horrified because they had been on HRT their whole menopausal existence. How could they become osteoporotic? Well, then we found out she was just taking vaginal estrogen. Well, newsflash, vaginal estrogen is not systemic. It's not going to stimulate bone remodeling the way systemic is. It's a locally applied hormone. So women need to understand there's so much to unpack. Is it local? Is it systemic? Is it estradiol? Is it some cocktail of estrogens? Is it biased, which includes estriol, which is a pregnancy hormone of estrogen? So there's so much to unpack. We could do an entire podcast on that. Progesterone, you can take it transdermally, you can take it orally. Some women have incredible intolerances to it. They take it rectally. I mean, again, huge universe. And this is why it's got to be individualized. Also knowing that different levels, different concentrations of hormones are going to have different outcomes. Are you just looking to get rid of your hot flashes and your migraine? Great. There's one way to approach that. Are you looking to improve your lipid profile and lock in your resistance to dementia and osteoporosis and everything else? That's a whole different thing. So there's this massive spectrum. And this, again, is why we're always going to go back to just because a physician has a script pad and can write you a prescription for HRT does not mean that you're getting the HRT that you're seeking. So we always throw it back on ladies and say, get yourself educated, know all of your options, and then make a decision as to what works best for your goals, your needs, your lifestyle. I mean, we have a woman who she was offered transdermal creams, both progesterone and estradiol, and this was going to be her HRT regimen. Huge fans of that, not normally. She's also an avid scuba diver. She's in the water all the time. Well, guess what? The skin is a reservoir, and if we flush it underwater, we're going to dump our hormones, and so transdermal applications would not have been good for her. Okay, so these are the things where women need to step back, stop rushing into the nearest person who can dose them HRT, and figure out first, what do they want? What are they looking for? What's going to achieve their ultimate goals for their healthy aging? And then research a physician. It's likely not going to be your OBGYN, no matter how much you love them for delivering your babies. They're probably not the right person because they don't get HRT training. So HRT, it's an art. There are a lot of nuances to it. It should be highly individualized, and it's not a set it and forget it proposition. It needs to be managed. And so you need a physician who's not going to just meet with you 10 minutes every twice a year and call it HRT management. That's not HRT management. That's irresponsible medicine. Hormones are super powerful. They need more oversight than that. So it's hard for us to just go, okay, these are all your options, because it's literally so individual.
Well, you already touched on it, but maybe we can drill down a little bit more, like the difference between MHT and HRT, because you sort of mentioned it, but I think it would be good to explain that, because I think the allopathic approach is often just symptom management.
It is. Yeah. And that's, we say MHT is a bit of a tell, like, just be careful if your doctor refers to it as menopausal hormone therapy, because it means that you will get it if you have symptoms.
And only specific symptoms. What are they, Maria? Hot flashes?
Osteoporosis.
Yes.
And hot flashes.
Dry vagina? Nope. No systemic HRT for you.
Right. You could just use vaginal estrogen for that. And that will, that's awesome for vaginal dryness. But like Kristin said, it's not going to protect your bones. Right. It's not going to prevent your arteries from stiffening. So again, MHT, careful. Will it help suppress a hot flash? Yes. You don't need a lot of estrogen to suppress a hot flash. Will it protect your bones? Highly debatable. So super careful with that. I think that the doctors and powers that be have decided to call it menopausal hormone therapy because they have an issue with the word replacement. They don't think we're replacing hormones. We're just dealing with symptoms. And we take issue with that. And Chris and I have no problem calling menopause and the period of life after menopause, which is postmenopause, we have no problem calling it a hormone deficiency state. You're super deficient in hormones.
Yeah, and women get so triggered by this. I mean, if you were diabetic and someone that says, well, you're insulin deficient, the diabetic's not going to take some political stance against you and lose their mind because you said have a deficiency of insulin, right? If you're nearsighted and you need glasses, that doesn't mean you're deficient as a person, but your vision is deficient. You've got issues there. So why do we get so triggered as women when the concept of hormone deficiency comes up? I mean, it's just absolute silliness, and ladies need to kind of like check themselves a little bit and ask why the trigger is happening there.
I think one of the things that still really trigger women is the idea of breast cancer or just cancer risk in general associated with hormones. So can you guys speak to that a little bit?
I think women need to, again, learn about all the biological actions that are occurring over the cycle of the 28 days of your hormone production premenopausally. Because newsflash, one of those things is an incredibly crucial cancer protective action. The peak of estradiol followed by the peak of progesterone actually modulates what's called p53 tumor suppressor. It's our most cancer protective action in the body. And when we lose our hormones, specifically losing not just their volume, but also their peak presentation, we lose that cancer modulation. And so if you look at, I was just doing some research on this for Maria for something, if you look at the incidence of breast cancer, the average age of breast cancer in the United States in particular is 62 years old. That's the median, I should say, not the mean. That's the median. That means that 50% of women are going to get it before the age of 62 and 50% after. If you look at the average, it's even higher. So why are we blaming hormones on breast cancer that occurs during the years a woman is hormone deficient? The biology of cancer, if we understood it fully, we'd have solved it by now, but we have woefully failed in that regard globally. What we do know is that it's multifactorial. There are modifiable risks and non-modifiable. Non-modifiable is going to be things like your genetics, right? Your estrogen metabolism, we would argue, is modifiable. But whether you have the CHEK2 gene or the BRCA gene or whatever, that's not modifiable. but how they express, your genetics and how they express can be modified. How? Through not drinking alcohol, through sleeping sufficient amounts, circadian rhythm management, HPA axis function, toxin exposure, a good microbiome, looking at all of these things, thyroid function, nutrient status, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what improves all of those? Estradiol. So if we're going to blame we're going to blame our breast cancer that occurs during a state of estradiol deficiency, we need to sort of back up and go, wait a minute, where was the messaging that came from this? It came from a period of time in which we were using endocrine disruptors and calling them hormones, and then women were getting cancer. So progestin exposure, synthetic estrogen exposure. Are those things cancer driving? Absolutely. Are they hormones? They're not. And this is what we want women to see, is that your hormones were protecting you all these years. And as you start to lose them, you lose that protection. What the studies even show is that women who have a personal history or an actual family history, which by the way means 2 or more relatives who were diagnosed with breast cancer prior to the age of 60. So I think a lot of women need to hear that again, prior to the age of 60, because a lot of us have mothers who are diagnosed with breast cancer, but it's when they're 62, 70, etc. That doesn't make you have a family history of breast cancer. That's just your mom's history. So understanding that the studies are showing that even in women with those 2 situations, the use of HRT actually reduces mortality from breast cancer, improves ultimate outcomes, lowers the chance of recurrence for those who have actually had it, and those who do get a recurrence, it's local and non-invasive. We need to be really honest about those facts with women so that they stop eschewing HRT because of this fear of cancer. Because in every instance, HRT is going to improve quality of life and actually be protective or net neutral when it comes to cancer.
And despite everything you just said, which I completely agree with, there are still women that are hesitant about hormone replacement therapy, right? So,
Yeah.
and they are trying to weigh the pros and cons. Are there any natural approaches that are sufficient or maybe even, preferable in certain cases?
I mean, I think if a woman is currently in active treatment for cancer of any kind, she probably is not going to be in conventional circles given HRT. That's just a reality. Some will be offered it. It depends on what their treatment modality is. Certain types of SERMs, selective estrogen receptor modulators, are going to either lower the impact of HRT or just make it not worth it. But for those who really, 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 really want to continue to fear it, they just have to accept then that the strategies available to them will be primarily for symptom suppression. They're not going to be for health span optimization. Are there perfectly fine herbals and different things that can improve maybe your hot flashes, improve some anxiety, and maybe some metabolic function? Yes. Again, are they going to be enough? No. But that's a risk reward thing that every woman needs to make. I will say that if you talk to breast cancer survivors, once they realize that they could take HRT, most will say, I would rather live a shorter, healthier life than a longer life in a state of hormone deficiency. It's that impactful to quality of life for cancer survivors in many instances.
I just have 2 more quick things I want to touch on before I run out of time. One of them is cognitive health as we are aging as women. Can you speak to just the estrogen's role in keeping us mentally sane and not having brain fog and not having Alzheimer's as we are getting older?
So it helps to clear tau protein from the brain. So that's one significant role of estradiol. And we know that tau protein is associated with Alzheimer's. It's most likely not causative, but it is associated with Alzheimer's.
We also have progesterone. I mean, I think when it comes to cognitive health, we got to really look at both hormones in that instance. Progesterone is super important for brain health. It's important for our neurotransmitter production and escorting it across the blood-brain barrier, modulating mood. I think that for me, Maria and I joke that I used to need lists for my lists in order to get through the day. And I considered myself super high functioning, corporate attorney, raising 3 kids, doing all this great stuff. And I was like, what is wrong with me? I literally cannot function. That was probably my first sign of perimenopause. And that most likely was by the fact that I was given a progestin IUD and had my progesterone production completely suppressed. So yeah, I think we need to understand it's both estrogen and progesterone. And that's what goes all the way back to Maria's original statement that this is a neurological shift that occurs, and perimenopause is that beginning. So with that progesterone falling off first and then estradiol following, cognitive changes are just a guarantee for a lot of women.
And I think what women may also need to hear is that even if you don't have a uterus, you may still need progesterone.
Yes, exactly. For what Maria was just saying too. I mean,
Important fact for your brain.
for your brain, your bones, so many things. Yeah.
How is gut health playing a role in hormone replacement therapy and just menopause symptom relief? Because I think a lot of people just don't even realize they have gut issues because they don't necessarily have the typical symptoms of GI issues. Can you guys talk about just the relationship there for hormone balance and just managing midlife?
Yeah, so gut health plays a huge, like almost kind of central role in how a woman will experience hormone replacement therapy. And the microbiome does suffer without estrogen loss, without estrogen, and when it's lost, the gut will suffer. We slow in transit time, right? And so many women suffer from constipation. And then you suffer from constipation and you're using HRT. That is not a good situation. We do need, whether we're making our own hormones or taking hormones, the body does actually send them through a process of detoxification, basically ending up with a bowel movement. And that's one very important way that we maintain healthy hormone levels in the body.
Yeah, I mean, the gut microbiome and estradiol actually have a two-way relationship. So as Maria said, as we lose estrogen, our microbial diversity changes, but as our microbial diversity changes, how we process our estrogen also changes. So it's a super, super important relationship. And I think too, we've normalized a lot of really crappy gut situations. I mean, Maria and I will get clients and they'll fill out their intake form and they'll tell us that they poop 3 times a week. And we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But yet when you ask them what their GI things were, they're like totally normal, great. And then we ask them frequency of bowel movements. We're like, nope, not so much. So it is super important. I think, unfortunately, we're being oversold this concept of probiotics that are going to solve all menopausal and perimenopausal women's problems. It's a little bit more complex than that. And looking at the food that we're eating, even our stress, inflammatory processes, our bile mobilization, like there's so many parts to gut health that come into play to sort of create a whole system that functions healthfully. So it's estradiol, and then it's all these other things. And just popping a pill is not going to solve the problem, no matter how many Menobelly probiotic commercials that you get, sent to you on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah. So your book, The Great Menopause Myth, it's really so educational. I highly recommend it for all the listeners. And I just want to round up with one last question to each of you, if you could each answer this question. And this is not related to menopause, but what is your personal definition of living an optimized life, and how can women move closer to that ideal?
Ah, this is a sweet question. Okay, optimized life, for me, comes down to this like sense of contentment and gratitude. And
I taking the words out of my mouth.
Well, maybe that's why we get along so good.
I think so, yeah.
Contentment, gratitude, like being able to kind of pursue things that are important to me. That would be things like spending time with my family, traveling, and doing meaningful work, or just the top things that come to the top of my mind. So
yeah, I agree. I think having a sense of gratitude for your life, having a sense of purpose, I think is incredibly important. Women, and just I think any male or female, that as we approach late 50s and 60s, we start to see this as like we've reached some finish line. And I kind of see it as a start line. Like this is an opportunity that we all have. So I think an optimized life is really leaning into the possibilities of your purpose and being able to pivot and shift on the fly, having good health, having good relationships, having a good faith foundation, all of these things matter, and living each day to the fullest and really not spending a lot of time on things that take away that joy and pleasure.
Hey, that's a wrap for today. But before we go, I want to share something I've been diving into recently. The best way to use GLP-1s like semaglutide, known as Ozempic or Wegovy, and tirzepatide, also called Mounjaro. These powerful weight loss peptides have become widely used over the past few years, but there's also been a flood of misinformation on how to use them safely and effectively. I made my own share of mistakes over the past few years, learning through trial and error as I work to improve my own metabolic health. I want to give you the shortcut to help you avoid these pitfalls so you can use these peptides more effectively. That's why I created a free mini course to give you the blueprint for using GLP-1s for body recomposition the right way. I will cover optimal dosing strategies, important lifestyle and hormone optimization steps, all of which can help you avoid plateaus and eventually taper off these peptides safely once your goals are reached. Now, to access this free mini video course, just scroll down to the show notes and dive right in. It's all there waiting for you. And remember, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it is not a substitute for professional medical advice.